to win the game.
Shoot in the heart of Lincoln, America.
I say, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
On air and online at theticketfm.com. Here are your hosts, Jake Bakoven and Enrique Alvarez Clary.
It is almost 12:30 here on a Wednesday, which means congratulations, you've made it halfway through the week. Another weekend is on the way. Unfortunately, I can't promise, Super Bowl weekend this week, but it will be quite exciting, especially if you're a Husker Hoops fan, because Sunday, at least one player of the basketball team I saw earlier today on Twitter is calling for a no-sit Sunday. That is as good as Nebraska basketball has been in a while, that they are now trying to get the fans motivated, and I expect a full crowd there. Now, no sit Sunday is hard to replicate because that game was pretty much for an automatic, or not an automatic bid, but for getting a chance to go to the NCAA tournament. Nebraska, not quite there. Austin, by the way, in for Rico?
I am not
today.
Rico.
Yeah, you're not Rico.
True.
Yeah, you can hear that in his voice. You can see it on our streams. But what are your memories from No Sit Sunday? Were you there? Were you around?
I was not there. I don't remember a whole lot about the game other than that I know it happened.
Yeah.
I remember the conversation leading up to it because it was the first time in seemingly forever that Nebraska had a chance. We do this thing wherever Nebraska wins a game, it's tournament. Here we go.
Yeah.
This is the one. I it's hard not to because I just haven't seen that much success. But that was a day that we all knew, okay, this is actually happening. And from start to finish, just the environment, hearing about it, being in there, that's when you knew this was, okay, this is the one. This is actually happening.
Yeah, because if you remember that year, Nebraska, it took a run to kind of put themselves in that position. So, ultimately, even with that win against top 10 Wisconsin, because they didn't fare well at the Big Ten tournament, they were 11 seed. So it's not like the team was just absolutely a lock going into No Sit Sunday. But I'll never forget that. And I was up in the 300 section, eventually moved down to storm the court by the end.
Well done.
Find myself a nice Tom Izzo sign somebody had brought. So that was kind of fun. But in any case, it was at least in the 300 section from just about anybody you ask, like, that's a ridiculous ask of anybody, of any crowd. Like, there's not going to be 100% of the people that stand up the whole time. I never saw anybody sit.
Good.
I mean, it was crazy that people fell through with it. And again, Sam Griesel saying no sit Sunday, maybe this week. Maryland coming to town. Nebraska's won 3 of 4. The energy in Husker hoops is at a place that it hasn't been, obviously, under Fred Hoiberg. And it certainly has been quite a long time since Nebraska's gotten there. If they can win against Maryland, that will put them at 500 after last night's win on the road in Piscataway at the Jersey Mike's Arena. Got them up to 13-14, 6-10 overall in Big Ten play, and another ugly mark for another Big Ten team as far as their tournament resume goes. But the more Nebraska wins, the less ugly, I suppose, it gets. Maybe it's I don't know. At this point, maybe Penn State's hoping Nebraska gets a few more wins for their own tournament.
Well, and vice versa. Nebraska wants Penn State to pick them up as well, because Nebraska at 6-10 is still in 12th in the Big Ten, which is, again, not that 6-10 is good, but my goodness, it feels like a big step forward, and you're still in the play-in. So Nebraska needs Penn State and Wisconsin to win a couple big ones to look better, but also lose so Nebraska can catch up to them. Rutgers is still a top half of the conference team, probably a 7 seed, probably, but that's on thin ice right now. Rutgers still has work to do to get a better draw.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Once you get to past the Big Ten tournament, like what these teams will be seeded in the NCAA tournament, Purdue's probably a number 1 seed, if not a 2. I mean, they'll be right up there. After that, I don't know if you're going to have like the traditional, here's the 4 seed and here's a couple 5 seeds. I mean, I think you're falling back. I mean, we'll see what Indiana, I mean, who can finish up hot obviously matters. If you can kind of stay in that single digit loss category, that positions yourself pretty well. But I mean, you're just looking at that where Nebraska is, like you said, 6-10 in conference play, but they've separated themselves. They've put themselves kind of in this tier, I suppose, along with Penn State and Wisconsin. That's that's kind of is going to be fighting to get out of that Wednesday game. Ohio State somehow has let the season get away. They're 3-11 in conference play. Interesting times up there. Minnesota 1-12, clearly the bottom of the Big Ten. But like you said, a 6-10 team, usually that's not going to be the 12th place team in the league. And for Nebraska, I don't think you worry too much about that. You've got 4 games left, 3 at home. I mean, if you can get to 8 wins, it's hard to imagine you'd be playing on Wednesday, but
you probably will.
You might, yeah.
You probably will at this point because there's just that whole logjam. Penn State's a half game up on Nebraska. Those 2 teams split that series. Wisconsin, game and a half up on Nebraska, 1 in the win column, 2 in the loss column, but you have head-to-head over them. Michigan, you don't have head-to-head over. They're at 8 wins right now. Rutgers, you have head-to-head. They're at 8. But finishing at 8 wins, I think, is the optimistic end-of-season scenario for Nebraska. You're right. They've played themselves up into kind of that middle tier, which is basically everyone except Ohio State, Minnesota, and Purdue at this point.
Right.
But they're still the bottom of the middle tier.
Yeah.
Nebraska should be favored against Maryland. Maryland has been wretched on the road. You can't lose to Minnesota. And then Nebraska's underdogs in its final 2 games, even if they win these next 2. Michigan State's just better. That, to me, is the biggest game on the schedule.
Not as hot as they were earlier in the season.
But still better than Nebraska.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Still more talented. Not unwinnable, but it'd be an upset. And then going on the road to Iowa, they're going to be angry.
Yeah.
That's a big one during the regular season. So everything is on the table for Nebraska at this point. It controls its own destiny as much as it can, for being 6-10 in the conference. But say Nebraska goes 2-2 in these next 2 games, and you finish the regular season a game below 500 and 8-12 in conference. That's fine. That's fine. It's successful enough.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, if Nebraska, just even coming into the season, when you weren't thinking the injuries would hit, if you would have told me preseason they get 7 Big Ten wins, I said, that's about what I'm looking for. That's pretty darn solid. And Fred Hoiberg has kind of had to reinvent this team through the injuries. And clearly, I mean, I said it last night, put the dirt on any discussion, on the grave of any discussion of Fred Hoiberg not coming back with how impressive this has been. And then the other thing that that continues to be a story is how good Keisei Tominaga has been, and what does that kind of mean for him moving forward? Because there's all sorts of questions about Nebraska. What do you have coming back next year? If you're kind of looking at that, the key is bringing back Keisei, which midway even through the season would have been like, yeah, it's a nice piece. Now it's like that might be a preseason All Big Ten type of guy.
Ooh, I don't know if I'm willing to go that far. I need to see another offseason of development because he's been fun. He's played some awesome basketball the last couple weeks. I'm still not sold that you can build a team around him and his talents. Maybe you can, but I think Keisei's best is a second or third option. If he's the option for Nebraska next year, I'm a little worried. I'm a little nervous. Not to say he can't. Yeah. I just want to see a little bit more before I go all in on Keisei Tominaga, number 1 option.
That's interesting because he's been the number 1 option, the last 4 games, and you're 3-1. You're doing it better than what they've done for a while. And you wonder too, and this is part of the discussion that people are kind of having is like, wow, imagine him playing like this if you had Vandermill and Gary. And you keep coming back to what I keep coming back to is like, I don't think it happened. I don't think he'd get the green light. I don't think that this would be this would have developed this way. Remember, Keisei is a guy that was kind of seen as kind of the spark guy off the bench. Can get your second unit rolling or be one of the first guys to, somebody you could rely on as offensive production off the bench. But I'm fascinated to see how it goes. I know he's really tiny, but it kind of, or not really tiny, but he's small for a basketball player. 6'2" is pretty tall in general. But it kind of reminds me, and maybe this is just because I'm a Celtics fan, but when the Celtics got Isaiah Thomas, that's the same type of thing. He was kind of a bench player in Phoenix, but a really good one. And then they brought him into Boston, and it was still just his height. Nobody could get over it. Nobody could say, yeah, you can build around that guy. And eventually his height caught up to him because he went to the paint too much and got hurt. But for one season, he was MVP Isaiah Thomas, not of the team, like in the league. Not the actual MVP, but like second or third. I mean, he was that darn good, averaging around 30 points. What I'm saying is if Hoiberg can keep not Hoiberg, not a similar size guy, but Tominaga, if he can keep this up, I don't know if you're averaging 20. you're an all Big Ten type of player. And again, to your point, we don't know if this is just a hot stretch or kind of how it goes, but it's tough to say, hey, Casey, we're not going to need you to shoot 12, 14 shots at this point.
Well, yeah, he has to, plain and simple. He does so much for Nebraska. And I think last night was a great step in the right direction for Casey, because if you look at the guys that were matched up against him from Rutgers, all of them had at least 2 inches of height on him, if not more. That's a big team. That's a physical team that didn't play up to its usual level, of physicalness. But in Casey was off early, but he took it. He didn't get punked. He stepped up big in the second half. So to do that against a team built like Rutgers, there's something to Casey. Just how much something, I don't know, but I was impressed with how he played against a team built like Rutgers last night.
Yeah, and of course another big storyline was C.J. Wilcher starting and
homecoming,
really going off in the first half. Ended up with 5 3-pointers. A little bit of foul trouble kind of kept him at bay there in the second half, but very, very, very much needed, and something that I think, and you don't want to you don't want to focus on it too much, but because you're just going to want to keep it going. But I think that is part of kind of the missing piece that we've seen from this team. A lot of people are saying that was the most complete game we've seen from Nebraska. It's hard to argue with. I mean, ultimately, part of it might have been the press. I think they allowed them to get a few more assists than they usually do. But in general, Nebraska did a good job of breaking down the press. And this wasn't a game where you're going, Nebraska swung up and punched them. Like, Nebraska looked like the better team throughout a majority of that game. Now, throughout a majority of the season, no, but for that game, that's why that was a complete game. And part of it is having another flamethrower out there.
Best win of the Hoiberg era.
Yeah, I think
maybe.
Yeah,
probably
up there. Yeah. That Creighton one was pretty good too.
Creighton. Yeah, that's in the discussion. Beating Wisconsin the way they did on Brad Davison's senior day will always hold a special place in my heart, and even Ohio State at the end of last season.
Yeah, without Bryce. Yeah. But in any case, best win, that's up for debate. But this team being where they are at this position, still with an under 500 record, mind you, it's still the best, I think, position that the Hoibergs had them on, unless you want to count early season success against Creighton in the dreams there. But Creighton, by the way, a good win now. Kind of they're kind of shifted throughout the season where it's like that team's actually not very good, and now they're back in the top 25. So although they did lose last night, but that'll be interesting to kind of follow along.